Can you guys see my PowerPoint screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Excellent. Yes. Okay. So first of all, thanks everyone for joining the call, and taking time out of Thursday mornings to talk through the configuration portal webinar. So this is again, I think most of you we were on the call a few days ago. My name is Ben Strykowski. I'm one of the technical leads for the Open Checkbook project, and I've been working with the Commonwealth for the last 4 or so years on a variety of projects, but most of the Open Checkbook. And so what we're going to talk about today is the kind of second piece of the application, or the second piece of the solution, and it's basically called the Configuration Portal webinar. And I'll go into more detail on kind of the components of it. But before I do, I'll kick it over to Bobby to kind of do an intro of the agenda and a few of the highlights. Bobby, do you want to walk through that, or are you having problems seeing the screen? I'm happy to walk through it if you can't.
Yeah, Ben, if maybe you could start that off, since I am having that difficulty, that'd be great. And then I will, just add in supplementary details.
Okay. So the goals of the session today are to review on system architecture, and it's not terribly nuts and bolts. The goal is really to review kind of what this application does, how it's going to help you guys input your contextual data, how it fits into the overall project. And then we're going to do a review of the portal wireframe, which is the different pages within the application, how they work together, what the design of each page is, and so on and so forth. And then I'm going to do a demo of the portal. We'll walk through a few of a sample set of data from one of the previous authorities. We'll recap all the tasks and things that are required out of your authority when using this application, and then we'll walk through the upcoming timeline and meetings, kind of as we get towards the end of the session. And then towards the end, we're going to go ahead and wrap up, and we'll talk about next steps. Those are really the goals of the session today, to get you guys familiar with an application that is typically used with authorities to capture your configuration data, bring it onto our environments, and marry it up with the files that you're going to send over for our discussion on Tuesday. And hopefully it will start to create a bigger picture of how all of these components start to work together, and also how they fit into the broader project schedule. Any questions on that agenda for today? Okay. So again, we want you to leave the session today with a better understanding of the configuration portal structure, pages, and tasks, the process that drives how and when the configuration portal is displayed on the screens, the target timeline, so when are you creating certain pieces of contextual information, when are we ideally hoping to get that information from you, how do you update that information, and then how do you test and verify that your contextual information is accurately displayed. So those are the big tasks, those are the big items that we want to cover today, and over the next few slides we're going to talk through those. So this slide has a bit of information on it. This is really the high-level onboarding architecture. So if you kind of focus on the left-hand side of the slide, the design of the architecture, as you can see from, I believe it was Tuesday, we have a set of onboarding dashboards. So you guys, I hope, have all seen the Open Checkbook site. Basically what we have is we have a copy of those dashboards from the Open Checkbook site that are kind of used for internal use for you guys to play around with over the next 13 weeks. So we'll give you login credentials and all that good stuff, and each one of you will have access to your own kind of area within the dashboards. And that's when you send files over, as we talked about on Tuesday, those files will load into our system and it will show on that dashboard. But in addition to just the dashboard, excuse me, there is some, not only, so you have the transactional data that you're going to be sending via flat files, but we also have some contextual data that we have on the screens that things like your authority description, your authority contact information, things that are typically fairly static. The way that works is you would upload that information into this configuration portal because it's not a whole lot of information. It's fairly static. It's fairly small volumes. And so we use the configuration portal to manage that data have you enter that data and confirm it, and then our system will basically take all of that kind of static configuration data and will marry it up with the flat file data that you have coming in that we talked about on Tuesday, kind of mash all that data together, and it will put it on the dashboards in the appropriate locations. So that's kind of what this process is showing on the left-hand side. So you'll see the first of those two blue boxes. This is the configuration portal here. This is the data validation dashboards. We talked about these data validation dashboards earlier this week, and now we're going to get into a little bit more depth about the configuration portal. The main tasks that you're going to be doing in the configuration portal are things like your spending category descriptions, audit revenue, or audit spending and revenue data, organizational information, descriptions about your accounts and departments, things that, again, aren't changing very often and are fairly static within your organization. There's a few ways you can enter that information. You can either upload it for things like department description lists or things that you have in spreadsheet form. For things like your authority name, there are some areas with manual data entry. There's a process for validating that, so you would go in and whatever the validation process that your organization requires, folks can log in and validate that data and iterate over that data for a period of time before that data is deemed correct. And then once it's validated, that's kind of the final set. We will store that data for you. That data, let me allow here. We'll store that data for you in the portal, and then we'll work with you to get that data deployed. So it follows the same process that the cyclical schedules that we were talking about earlier this week follow. So over the next, there's kind of two pieces to this from a procedural standpoint. Over the next 13 weeks, the system will be sweeping your data files every hour. So as you send new data I'm talking about the flat file data. The system will be sweeping for this flat file data every hour. And if it finds that what's going to happen is when that flat file data comes in, it's going to go and look up, okay, I have, 5 spending categories in this flat file, and I'm going to go pull in the spending category descriptions that were entered from the configuration portal, and it will push all that data to the dashboards. So that happens on a fairly regular schedule. So I guess my point is that you can iterate over this. The data will refresh on the dashboards. You can change it. The data will refresh, et cetera, et cetera. And that process will continue throughout as you guys build your files and you upload or enter configuration data. That'll happen on an hourly cycle. And again, you can validate all of that going forward. Once that's done, you kind of leave the left-hand side of this diagram and you move to the right-hand side. And we will help you push all that historical data that you've been sending us over those 13 weeks to the live production environment. There's a process for you sending files now on a monthly basis because we're only receiving the data monthly. And then you can upload or enter new configuration portal data during certain periods once we're live and users can see this data. So those are the kind of the two pieces. I know that's a bit of information. Maybe I'll pause there and see if there are any questions on that. I'm going to talk through it. I think it'll make a little bit more sense when we go through the demo as well. Okay. And so before we go into the demo, this is a high-level structure of how the dashboard works. There's a few high-level tabs. There's a homepage tab, or I believe it's a summary tab. There's some file monitoring tabs. So earlier in the week, I talked about when you upload or when you send us new files, that file monitoring tab within this configuration portal will be the place where you can monitor that data. So when you send new files, it'll say whether that file is completed. You can go in and go ahead and delete that file if you want to. That's where you can manage that process. If you click on the homepage side of it, there are some data entry pages. So for entering your summary data about your authority, spending category data descriptions, organizational data descriptions, and then your audit data. And for each of those, there's a slightly different process for entering that information. For most of them, you'll be able to review, or you'll be able to actually upload spreadsheets into this portal if you're managing in spreadsheet form, or in some cases you can do it manually. So that's the high-level structure. I'm going to go through the demo now and show you guys how this all kind of fits together. And then maybe I'll go through and highlight these bullet points here. So if we pull up, log off here. So essentially what you'll get is you'll get in a login credentials that looks like this. This is one for MBTA. User credentials and password. You'll be able to log in, and it'll bring you basically to this configuration homepage. Excuse me. As you'll notice, there are a few tasks on here kind of going down the bottom. These are kind of your high-level tasks. So these are things like, as I had mentioned earlier, entering summary data, entering spending data or spending descriptions or summary information about that spending data, your organizational data, and then your audit spending and revenue data. And then up here, there's also another tab for file monitoring. This we'll talk about in a minute. This monitors all the files that you sent and how to manage that throughout the project and process. So maybe I'll dive into the different tasks here. So you can either click enter and edit here on any of these buttons here, or you can actually click on the associated tab up above. So this is pretty simple. I mean, I would think most of you have probably worked with form-based entry, on an internet browser before. That's really all that a lot of this is. You'll notice how we have some basic information on this first tab about the authority. What's your authority name? Authority description. Authority website information, so this would be your external website that will populate on the dashboard screen. Authority contact information. And then down here we haven't entered, the MBTA hasn't entered in this information yet, but there's a place here to enter in extended description. So on the dashboard there are places where we show basic information about your authority on the home page, but we also have a separate page where it shows extended information about your authority. And so that's where you would enter that information. A legal disclaimer. So a legal disclaimer, this is typically anything that you want or your legal department wants to specify about the legality of your data or what may or may not be, kind of legally required. This varies a little bit from authority to authority as far as what they deem appropriate to put in this field, but we wanted to add an area as prior authorities had asked about that. What's included and what's excluded. So as we had talked about earlier, some data you guys will just not send us for security reasons or otherwise. And then, some of that data will be at an aggregate level and won't have that, will be at a summary level. These two fields at the bottom here are meant to describe or display what is included in authority and what's not. So in previous authorities, we've put in things like, what's excluded, certain types of vendor transactions that are very sensitive to our particular authority for these reasons, et cetera, et cetera. So that's another area where you can add context about the data that you're sending in via the flat files. And what will happen is this data that you enter in here, you'll hit apply changes. It'll push that data over into the dashboards, combine it with any relevant flat file data that's coming in, and it will show them as one kind of cohesive set of data once it lands on the dashboards. Any questions on that page?
Ben, I can chime in here. This is Bobby again from ANF, and I just want to point out to the group that most of this data. What we found from waves 1 and 2 is that, especially for the authority description, that most likely already exists on your website or in specific communications that you have about your authority. And so we found that, that particular authority description as well as the extended description, authorities rely typically on already existing, information about themselves that they utilize. And so we find that usually that's not much of a lift for authorities. And with the legal disclaimer that Ben mentioned, with that, we've also received numerous requests during waves 1 and 2 for templates that authorities can use both to work off of for this disclaimer and also to call attention to any specifics about themselves. So, for example, authorities have noted that non-audited financial data is the majority of what's presented on the Open Checkbook, and that users should be aware of that. That's an example of how the legal disclaimer is used, and especially as we move into perhaps the data meetings, the week after next week, we can provide templates for numerous contextual fields, including the legal disclaimer, to help authorities, on this call, have an opportunity to see what others have done previously and to work off of those. And I should also mention that with the authority code and the authority, the authority code, that's going to be something that we will provide to you in this login credentials memo that Ben mentioned. This is going to be a fairly large email that will also have attached with it a variety of support documents for you. And so the authority code, that will be something that is either based on the acronym for your authority or something that is tied to your name and would be used by you both to log in into the portal and to the dashboards, as well as when creating your files. And that's all. I'll give it back to Ben.
Thanks, Bobby. Yeah, and so I pulled up MSBA. They have a little bit more complete data, but it works the same way. So this is not how it will look on the final. This is actually how it will look when you guys onboard. You'll log into a page here. You'll have an image that you guys can send us. I just want to highlight a few areas where some of this contextual data ends up living. So here's an example here's where your high-level authority description would go in one of the places. Once you clicked on your authority, we have some examples of some of the other contextual information. So here MSBA has their name here. They have a small image they provided. They have the description. The website is here, contact authority, legal disclaimer, and then I'll get into some of the other contextual pieces a little bit later. As you'll notice, if you go contact authority, it gives the contact information. That information comes from the configuration portal. So as you'll notice, a lot of this stuff, does land on the dashboards, does provide additional detail. We also created this page down at the bottom here that provides, let's see if we can get this to come up, some additional details on your authority. So what's included, what's not included. They have the placeholders here for now, but as MSBA enters in more data, they'll see some of those extended description information and legal disclaimer in here on the dashboards. So as you start to think about that, I just want to highlight a few areas where those do land on the dashboards in addition to the actual flat files. And by contrast, if they were to click on payments, you can see here how all of the kind of supporting payments data is also still on the dashboards, but there are essentially the higher level pages like the summary page and the kind of overview of your authority page. That's where a lot of that context will land. And then as users drill into further pages, that's when they'll land on, or that's when that data will tie to the bulk flat file transactions that you're sending via SFTP like we talked about on Tuesday. So, and this will hopefully become a bit more familiar as you get your login credentials and start playing around with the site. Most of the authorities have had a pretty easy time kind of learning and using it. So any questions on that first page? Okay, great. So once these tasks are all completed, if you go back to the home page, it'll flip that over to a complete. You can then go into your next task here, which is entering contextual information about your spending data. So there are a few areas here. Where you're entering additional contextual information about your spending data. The first is, as I mentioned on Tuesday, the site supports 3 types of spending accounts: payments, grants, and loans. The only one that's really required is payments. So, some authorities come in, they only have payments data. That's fine. We do ask that you provide a description about your payment data, as an when I say that, I mean overarching description. When that is entered, that will display here. Let me go back. That will display here. So as the authority, kind of the same way the current Open Checkbook works, is as the user hovers over any of these different payment types, it'll show that description in that gray box below. So that's really where that data will live. And it basically is just an overview of, MSBA's payments data is meant to describe, X, Y, and Z. It represents our spending in a variety of fashions. So if you need some sample data, we have some of that as well, or sample descriptions, I should say. But that's essentially the goal there. Spending category description upload, I'll get to that in a second. But before I do, I want to highlight these bottom sections. The first is payroll and pension descriptions. So as we talked about earlier, pensions is not required, but if you do provide pensions, that you would put in a high-level description about your pensions data here. So again, this is similar to a disclaimer where we're saying, same way that we did for payments, we're saying payroll data is meant to include X, Y, and Z. It does not include these things for these reasons. And we can talk through what those definitions are as we work with you individually. That's where you enter in that information there. I don't know if, so for MSBA, yeah, so they have just a placeholder here for now. They're still kind of working on this. But they have, let me see if I can pull up their payroll data. Their payroll data would display down below here. I believe they sent it to us. No, I guess not. So in any event, your payroll description would display here under the list here, and then once they finish sending their payroll data, it would show below. At the bottom here, we have allow you to set your frequencies. So once we get beyond this 13-week schedule, you will be sending us, as we said, usually monthly cycles. But if there is a reason, for example, you can't send payroll on a monthly cycle because of some internal processing or procedures that need to be followed, you can switch this to say quarterly, and then our system will be expecting it quarterly as opposed to monthly, and we know kind of from an ongoing perspective when you're sending that data. So those are the high-level areas of providing context about your spending data, and I try to highlight a few of where those live within, kind of the overall dashboards. There are some detailed areas. So if you look here, we have two things here for spending category and subcategory descriptions. If you click on one of these guys, you'll notice how we have a chart here, or I should say a table, with basically spending category descriptions tied to each spending category. So what this is if you go back to the dashboards, now we're going to click on payments here for MSBA, you'll notice how if I were to click on administrative expenses here, this page should refresh. And we have a description up here with a very tiny pie chart of that high-level category. So this is kind of hopefully starting to coalesce the concept of marrying the two pieces of information together. So as your transactions come in, and say you have 1,000 transactions that are all administrative expense related, our system will kind of combine that data with your singular administration expense description, and then anytime a user drills into that data, they'll have that description at their disposal. Anytime, and that's over here on the configuration portal is where that data is managed. So when you first get here, this will be blank. You can click Upload New Data. It will bring you to a 4-step process. I'm not going to walk through the process now, kind of in the interest of time. But a 4-step process for uploading a spreadsheet file. You essentially choose a file. You put it in a spreadsheet, and Bobby will send out templates that outline the format that those spreadsheets should be in, and also with some sample data for previous authorities that we've onboarded and how they provided that spreadsheet data. You upload it, you validate it, and then you hit upload. It uploads into the system, and then once it's done, it returns you here, and the list of your spending categories displays here. A few things to note that Bobby kind of alluded to earlier. In these spreadsheets, and anytime you're entering data for descriptive data, the spending type and spending categories has to match exactly with the spending type and spending category in your flat files. So we've had a lot of kind of iterations over with different authorities where that hasn't been the case, and obviously if that's not the case, then that data is not going to pull into the dashboards. So pretty important, but also fairly simple, just to make sure that your spending types and your spending categories, if you list payment and administrative expenses, that in your flat files you don't have something like admin expenses. And that also goes for your authority code as well. I believe there's an authority code field in the upload files. Want to make sure that you provide that same authority code everywhere in the system to keep things consistent. Questions on that piece?
I do have a question.
Sure.
I've been hearing different things on the spending categories. I thought I heard the other day that we had to use the ones that were listed here, but it sounds like we do have discretion on defining what we want our spending categories to be. Is that true?
That's right. It's kind of it's both in a way. We've given a starter list, so to kind
Okay.
of get you guys started. So if that's if that meets the bill with you guys or fits the bill with you guys, then you can use those. If they just aren't appropriate to your authority, then you have the option to add or remove ones from that list.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yep. And then just whatever list you use, that would be the list that you would manage here, and you would create your own descriptions for that list. So, any other questions on that? Okay. So going into spending subcategories, and one note here actually before I jump to spending subcategories, on the spending categories, because the system does support different types of financial instruments, namely payment, loan, and grant, you would also need to maintain those separately here. So if, for example, you had completely separate spending category lists for loans and for grants that were separate from payments, you would add those lists here and their associated descriptions here. If you want to reuse spending categories across those different financial instruments, so say you have highway and building projects that you distribute loans for as well, that works as well, but you would just need to add another entry under loans for highway and building projects. So the system maintains the lists in one location here as a master list, but it also expects that you define what spending type it's associated with. So another highlight there on that process. Okay, spending subcategories, by contrast, are a one master list agnostic of what the type is. So the way that these work is we've just provided, as you define and create your spending subcategory codes and names from your financial system, typically what authorities have done in the past, they've exported a master list of those spending categories and subcategories and either reused the category name as the description or have created their own descriptions depending on how big the lists are. So where you'll see that primarily is once a user drills down from the category down to a subcategory, say advertising expenses, they click on that subcategory. Lightning speeds today. So it looks like, actually this is a great example of a summary data as well. So a few things to note here. You'll see here how for, I believe this MSBA has a description for their subcategory. This line here, this kind of ties back to last Tuesday or this Tuesday. This is your summary level number. So this includes all vendor lists and vendor transactions associated with this subcategory and category. If there are vendors, then it will show the vendor list here, which may or may not match this $25 here. So in this case, it looks like there's really only one transaction under advertising, and it's a summary transaction. So this is exactly what would show if you provided us data for advertising expenses where all the vendors receiving information about or as associated with advertising expenses was not deemed appropriate to display, and that's what it would show here on the dashboards. Conversely, if you clicked on, I can't imagine postage would be sensitive. You're going to see a list of vendors here, and here's another good example. So they have $917 here for total spending under postage, but the grand total for their vendors is only $874. So that means they have a net here of some summary transaction data. So good thing to highlight. That goes back a little bit to Tuesday, but I want to highlight that since it's a good example. So back to the spending subcategories. You put in your same system, you put in your code, your name, your description. If you do not provide, I believe, I can't remember which ones are required and which ones aren't as far as the code and name, but you would just upload, if it's not a required field and you don't have codes, then you would just upload the codes as null, and that's fine. Our system will handle it. Same thing, you would upload new data. You could do it via spreadsheet form. One other note is once it's in here, once you get it in the state that you want it, you can also manually go in and edit them here in the site. So if you realize this needs to be a different spending subcategory code, you can go in and change it here. So same process for spending subcategory codes. That data displays in a very similar fashion to the categories. It just is at a different tier. Questions on that? Okay. And that pretty much ties out the spending data and data descriptions. Bobby, anything you want to add there?
Yeah, thanks, Ben. So one point that we made on Tuesday that I just want to reiterate is the fact that for the spending subcategories, an efficiency that authorities can use in this process is working off of the existing account names that you have already in your source financial data. And Ben will speak to sort of how to sort of structure that a little bit, but basically our goal there is to help you not have to sort of rethink the entire structure of subcategories that you already have, but to utilize what is already existing in your system and then just map those to the top level categories, both those that we recommend as well as any others that you feel are particularly important to emphasize about your authority's business. So what you'll see in a moment is also that there is an account name and description upload. And so then I think we'll need to probably speak a little bit as to how an authority would differentiate those two if they chose to do it this way. But we do want to just call that out, that is a process that you can implement in order to do this more quickly, the subcategories.
Thanks, Bobby. Sorry, can you guys still hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, great. So moving on to the organizational data. So once you've completed your spending category information, you move into uploading organizational data. Very simple, same process as the spending categories and subcategories. This is just for accounts and departments. So when you go through and you've uploaded your accounts per our discussion on Tuesday, this is where you would upload the actual associated descriptions with those accounts. So if you look in the list here, you'll see the account code, the account name, the account description, and then again, a lot of authorities have reused some of the data here from their internal source system. So that's account descriptions, very simple. And then department descriptions, same process. Again, as we mentioned on Tuesday, this will be your flattened list of departments. For authorities with no departments, you would just, provide your singular authority name here and its associated authority description. And again, the difference there is that as opposed to showing that description up on the homepage here, you would show that description, excuse me, that description would show here on the department page. So MSBA, I believe, actually has that. Yes. So they have Mass School Building Authority as their total list of departments representatively. And then that's the distinction of where that description for your authority would display within the department structure versus at the high level. And you'll see here how they have their MSBA description here. So that's the description that's going to pull from this list here. I'm showing two different authorities, but that's why they're not matching. Questions on that piece? Okay. So moving on to the next piece here, if we move on to, go back, spending and revenue audit data. So Bobby, before I jump into the technical piece of this, did you want to provide any kind of business context around what we mean by spending and revenue audit data, as I know you guys have been kind of refining that over the last few months?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Ben. So basically what the spending and revenue audit data feature on the Open Checkbook. So first to take this a step back, when a user goes on to your authority page, when this site goes live, what they'll actually be introduced with is your audit data first off. That would be the first sort of pie chart view of an authority's data that the user will see when they click in. And so what we've been recommending for this feature is first just to keep in mind that whichever data that an authority wants to utilize that's audited, on the Open Checkbook, it's only going to present a single year view of data. So even if an authority was to upload, numerous fiscal year data, into this file through the configuration portal, only the most recent year would be presented ultimately. And so, just thinking about whatever most recent fiscal year data you have available, at this point to upload, we would recommend that you utilize that. In terms of the actual, features here, what you'll see is that there's the authority audited revenue summary and authority audited spending summary, and this is really just, the most high-level general description that an authority can provide about their audited spending, and it can be really as simple as just kind of recapping the different sort of categories of spending represented in the pie chart that would be accompanying this information. And those categories, what we found is, especially for revenue and for spending, that, audited financial statements by authorities typically do have, an existing categorization that authorities can utilize. And, we can discuss this further, of course, in the data meetings, but we did just want to give that, initial view of how this can be utilized. And I'll give it back to Ben.
Thanks, Bobby. Yeah, so hopefully Bobby provided some, kind of business context on how this process works. The two pieces that, or the two main pieces of information that we're going to try and capture here with audited data is the high-level descriptions about your audited data. So this describes, as Bobby had mentioned, the context about what audited revenue, in this case, you're sending us. And then below here, this is the field that captures what information you're sending us about your audited spending data. So those are the high-level descriptions that you would upload there. You can review and upload data here. And we don't have, I believe MBTA doesn't have their audited data in here yet, and all of the current authorities that do have audited data haven't been kind of available for public release yet, so we can't quite show you that. But essentially, it's the same spreadsheet that you would upload. Bobby has a template for you on how that works. You upload a spreadsheet of a small spreadsheet of your high-level audited numbers. It comes into the site, and then it will populate here. You go back. To the left-hand side here, MSBA has not provided this data, but it will populate on the left-hand side here with two pie charts of your audited spending and audited revenue data. As Bobby had mentioned, the audited data is not required. It's more designed to provide an overarching picture of your authority's operations as it relates back to your financial statements. It is separate and not necessarily meant to tie to the bulk transactions that are coming in through your payments, through your spending, payroll, and potentially pensions files. It's more designed to represent the high-level, kind of audited financial statements that your authority captures. So that's what that facility is meant to provide. Any questions on that? Okay. So that pretty much ties out the kind of task-related piece of this. Again, as you go through each task in each tab, these check marks will complete and tell you what you have completed and what you haven't. Once that's done, the other piece that we wanted to highlight is this file monitoring tab. So if you go over here, I had highlighted this earlier, but essentially there's a couple of things that happen here. We repopulated the expectation that these files are going to be coming in as. And I should say that this is kind of the second role that the configuration portal plays in the overall kind of scheme of the solution, in that it helps you monitor the files that you've been transmitting to our system. So again, for the IT folks in the room, the report down below here shows your authority's code, what the file status was, whether it was completed, the file name. You'll notice how these follow fairly particular naming standards, the file type, start time, end time, and then the loaded record count that we loaded. So those are kind of the big components. What will typically happen, what a lot of authorities have been doing, is they'll send us a file. It will load in the system. They'll look on the dashboard and say, okay, it only partially loaded, or it didn't load exactly how I was expecting it to. Maybe the categories are not aligned the way that I wanted them to, and I need to recategorize them or something. They can go in and collect on a file that's been completed. They can go ahead and delete that data if they want. Once that data is deleted, it'll bring them back to this page, and it will show that record as deleted. fairly simple, but it also provides fairly powerful ability to, kind of load and reload data files on a very kind of quick and iterative basis. Our system will sweep for these files every hour. So if you need to iterate on something, you can just wait for the next hourly cycle, and it will sweep for that data and pull it in. And this is where whoever's building your file will typically manage the transmission of that file and how it's coming in the system. Any questions on that? Okay. We also have a fiscal year report on here. So this does the same thing as the file transition report. It just has, it just displays your data that we have in the system by fiscal year. So if you have MBTA, I believe we just did it with 2014 data, but it will show your authority's code, the associated fiscal year. This is really meant to be, you have sent us a bunch of data, maybe over multiple files that encompasses a full set of 2014 data, and you don't want to go in and delete, 5 or 6 files. You can go in here and click on a full fiscal year, and it will delete the data associated with that fiscal year across all of those files. That's what that's meant, designed to do. Questions on that? Any other questions on the demo in general? Okay. So we'll just try and do a quick recap here. I know we're starting to get a little tight on time. This is so now that we've kind of reviewed the solution and components, here is view the highlights that we went over. So onboarding notes, again, we're refreshing the load of the configuration portal data in your flat files hourly. It is to be authority tested. So this is designed, both the dashboards and the portal are designed for you guys to go in and upload and test this data, iterate on this data, and re-upload it to get it to the shape that you want it in. Once the system has gone live after the 13-week period, the contextual data is not meant to really be updated monthly unless it needs to be. It will be there and available during certain periods throughout the year for you to update contextual data as you need to. Say spending category description needs to be changed, or your authority's mission statement changes, or something like that. That's really the only time when authorities typically would load that data or change that data. But we will provide regular windows for you to update that information as you need. That is in contrast to the actual payments, payroll files, which we would need to get your incremental monthly data as it comes through your system on that cycle ideally. So a little bit of a difference there, but that's the different cycles for those. As far as the tasks, here's a quick recap of the tasks. The tasks are the homepage, summary page, description page. I think we reviewed, pretty much all of this. The transmission report and the fiscal year report. This slide is as much for you guys just as a reference as anything else. So, as this, demo is recorded, you guys can go in and review this information. A quick highlight of the timeline. Bobby, did you want to talk through the timeline? I mean, I know you can't see it, so since you can't see, maybe I can walk through it, Bobby.
Ben, actually, I've got the deck in front of me, so I know where we're at.
Great.
So again, we had the chance to see this on Tuesday, and as we're working to the end of the second week of onboarding, we've now had the chance to walk through the configuration portal today, as well as review the various data fields that the configuration portal is used to enter and update, and how that transitions over to the dashboards. What's noted on the slide, so if you look at the configuration portal webinar star, we have discuss portal user guide. So under that particular bullet, we have a fairly thorough user guide that can be used as a reference by you when you start to get acquainted with this tool. And that user guide, as I've mentioned before, is going to be part of this rollout of numerous support documents. And what we found with that in particular is it is definitely useful as a reference, but as authorities just continue to get comfortable with the portal, it really becomes just a sort of a backup reference if you have any questions. And just looking ahead, so we basically with the entering, uploading contextual information to the portal, we've heard, of course, at Friday's kickoff that there are other pressures that our authorities are facing right now. So what we're on our end, on the ANF and project management end of the onboarding, what we're considering is maybe a way that we can help the authorities in Wave 3 do their contextual information maybe in a delayed process, as a way to give you more room up front to start thinking through the categorization and think through payments data, because we feel that the contextual information in general would likely be a lot of it static and existing for you, and especially with the use of the templates that we have, that it could be accelerated. And so we just want to point that out today. We're still thinking this through, based on the feedback we got last week, and this is something that we're going to cover in more detail once ready, either next week or on the status calls, or the following week with the data meetings, depending on which we have first with each authority. And Ben, I'll just switch it back to you.
Okay, great. So thanks, Bobby. Yeah, so as far as the next steps, we have, and Bobby can help kind of provide some context on this, but as you noted, weekly status calls and data meetings coming up. So the status calls are used typically to exactly that, to get a quick, kind of beat on where you guys are at with your files, any issues you've had, anything we can help with, whether it's technical or business or procedural or whatever it may be. And we'll be having those, regularly over the next few weeks. And then the individual data meetings are a bit more of a deep dive into the, kind of data elements and context that we need to get from you guys. So I know that these two webinars are meant to be kind of an overview, and Bobby and I know it's a lot of information and kind of a lot of system work to get to know, and a lot of data, frankly, to be created. And so that's what the data meetings are for. It's designed to dive into the details of the creation of the files, questions you have that are specific to your authority. So if there are questions around the categorizations or certain date formats, or whether it's a technical issue or a business issue or whatever it may be, that's what those are for. So those are all coming up here in the next few weeks. And Bobby, and we also have myself and Shiva Kandikuri, who I believe joined a little ways through, to help facilitate those. So that's really kind of what we have going on for the next few weeks. Are there any questions on this stuff from a project perspective, timing, meetings, any of that stuff?
Yeah, Ben, I'll just jump in here. This is again Bobby from ANF, and as mentioned on Tuesday, invitations for both the individual status calls and the data meetings will be forthcoming. Again, we'll use those invitations to start the conversation with each authority regarding do we need to adjust any times for the proposed times for the status calls or the data meetings, and we'll be getting those out to you pretty soon, most likely either by the end of this week or on Monday. And yeah, just to take it from Ben, if there's any other questions, feel free to, as we wrap up here, to let us know if there's anything we can discuss from today's call.
Hi, this is Stefan from CDAC. I do have a question about the logging credentials and that sort of system information. Are we going to need to have our hands on that and kind of do a dry run with that information prior to our weekly individual status calls, or maybe you can just suggest what time frame we're expecting for the login credentials to this new system?
Sure. So we can send it.
Why don't you take it first? Yeah, take it first. I'll add in.
Okay. Yeah. So to answer your question, we have the login credentials. If you guys think it would be helpful to have that information this week, we can definitely work to get that sent out. You don't, strictly speaking, need it for the status meetings. The status meetings are more of kind of a deeper dive into all of this material. But if you feel like, based on the webinars, that this is sufficient for you to get started building the flat files, and you do want to start sending that data this week, we can definitely get those credentials out to you earlier rather than later. Is that helpful? I mean, in general, we haven't sent them out in the first week because folks are typically reviewing materials and things, but if you guys feel like you're ready to start building files, we can definitely send them out. But it's not required.
Okay. No, I think it might just be that, I mean, it's kind of what I do at CDAC is to work with the systems and data flow and that sort of thing. And I just anticipate that I'm probably going to have more questions at the ready, and I'd rather, do my homework ahead of time than I want to make our time most efficient.
Okay. Yeah, so if that's where you guys are at, we can definitely send out the credentials earlier. The only piece that we're still waiting for confirmation on is the interchange information. So we just sent a note out to our interchange folks yesterday. We should hear back from her today, and if we do, then I can send you the whole set of credentials. But at the very least, I can send you the credentials for the config portal and the dashboards.
Okay. And one more follow-up question to that. Now, is it only for each authority there's only one login, or is there some sort of different levels or any kind of nuance to that? For example, like, my boss, the CFO, she may want to have direct access, but for ordinary operations, it'll be pretty much all me.
We do just have one login credential. It is the same for all. There'll be three places where you'll need a login credential. One is for your SFTP client, the other is for the portal, and the other is for the dashboard. They all run off the same username and password. They're all different URLs. You'll have a different URL, obviously, for the portal and the dashboards, then you'll have a different server that you point at for the interchange piece. But we have not, to answer your question, we have not built in, kind of a hierarchical review of it. We do it towards the end of the project. Go through a process of review. We give you guys some time to do your kind of own internal reviews, and then we go through a process at A&F where we switch the accounts over and we review them. But there's nothing hierarchical as far as the security is concerned to lock, accounts within an authority. I think the way you're describing it.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. Any other questions?
Yeah, Ben, I'll just add to that last question. So, for all the authorities here, the logins, credentials will be provided, that is going to be for anyone at your authority to utilize. And, of course, if you choose to, decide how you want to distribute that internally, that's entirely, at your purview. And part of the reason we've had it that way is just to ensure that it's probably the most convenient way for anyone who is part of an extended team working on the Open Checkbook to be able to access the, the 2 or 3 main tools and entry points to the work that's required. So, again, that's been our basis for having just one login that, everyone at an authority can utilize.
Any other questions? Okay. Well, thanks everyone for joining. Again, we have the call has been recorded, so you can go on to the site and pick that call up. For any other further details, we will be distributing materials over the next few weeks as we work with you for the status meetings. And we look forward to talking with you next week.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, folks.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Yeah, thanks all.